So I think we will start. You can hear me, right? I have a tendency to mumble into the microphone, so I'm going to try and project. So welcome to this event, a conversation about music and politics, which, as you know, take its title from a refrain in a song by Bob Marley, where he says, "When it hits you, you feel no pain." The event is organized by the media concentration of the graduate program in international affairs, which is a part of the New School, the New School's General Studies Division and Milano. So, just to say a couple of words at the outset. In thinking about this, I didn't have to actually do a lot of thinking because we have a moderator, we have some panelists who'll do the thinking for us. But as I was thinking about this, I thought that I read an article in The Guardian that said that music is a powerful force. Not everyone reads the paper or watches the news, but almost everyone listens to music. And I started to think back, whether it's crowds of people where singing protest songs. I don't know if you've seen this great documentary, Amandla, The Revolution in a Four-Part Harmony. We can debate, some of the politics and some of these things, but it's so vividly portrayed, whether it's like nameless people making up songs, whether it's people composing music like Yuma Sakela, Maria Makeba, whether it's Marvin Gaye making music about the environment or making music about inequality in America, whether it's Young Jeezy making a song called My President is Black, I think it was, I can't remember the exact title, whether it's Lil Wayne making a song about Katrina, whether it's Louis Armstrong making a song in 1929, what did I do to be so black and blue? We could go on further afield, Fela Kuti in Nigeria, the effect that he's had on consciousness on the continent in Africa and further afield, Billy Bragg, I could go on and on and on, but I think I should not take up the time of our panelists. So we have a great panel, as I said, representing a wealth of musical and journalistic talent. They'll be properly introduced later, but just to sort of acknowledge them at this point, we have Carolina Gonzalez, Brian Jackson, Masauku Chipembere, Eddie Stats Houghton, I think you call Stats, right? And Willis Glasspiegel, and the panel will be moderated by Meghan Bandol. So before I ask our executive dean of the New School Studies in Milano, David Scobie, to welcome you, I just want to also acknowledge the people who helped work on this, who are Mina, I'm not sure if she's here at the moment, Boima Taka, who's here in the front, and of course Phil Acree from the Graduate Program in International Affairs for helping to make this possible. So let me just say something about David, and then I'll ask David to come and welcome you. David Scobie has been the Executive Dean of the New School for General Studies in Milano since last year. And I know that David cares deeply about the relationship between culture and politics. In fact, I've talked to him about this. And he's been the founding director of the University of Michigan's Arts and Citizenship Program, an initiative to integrate civic engagement with the liberal arts. And his scholarship explores politics, culture, and space in 19th century America, particularly in New York City. And I thought it would be appropriate for him to just come and welcome you here before I'm going to hand over to our moderator. Thank you. David.
I'll only say a brief welcome for a minute and then join you in the audience to be part of the conversation. It would be a pleasure to be able to welcome you to any interesting event, but it's a special pleasure to do it as a cultural historian and cultural studies scholar myself. And I'm really delighted that Sean and the others who helped to organize this and our guests helped to make this happen. When I started teaching at Brandeis University in 1983, in my first job in a history department, I had a memorable run-in with the chair of my department. I was teaching a course on working class culture in the United States, and it ended with the assignment being to listen to and discuss Bruce Springsteen's album, The River. And I was thoroughly dressed down for assigning music as an appropriate text for thinking about power and social class in history. It's wonderful that we are no longer in that space and that a graduate program in international affairs has immediate concentration and understands why a discussion about music and politics and the cultural politics of music is right in the sweet spot of what we're trying to understand. So, welcome.
So that leaves me with little else but to just introduce our moderator before I hand over to her for the evening. So our moderator is Meghan Bandol, and let me just say something quickly about Meghan. Meghan was born in the Eastern Cape of South Africa and raised in Botswana. After completing college, she became involved in the music industry in Johannesburg, which is in South Africa, where she managed Mega Music, a 1,200 audience capacity venue, showroom, recording, and rehearsal studio. There, she became involved in directing many collaborations featuring artists from all over the world. She helped produce some of the region's top-selling shows and promoting emerging as well as renowned artists like Yuma Sekela, Busim Slongo, Brenda Fassie, Papa Wemba, Linton Kwesi Johnson, Gil Scott-Heron, Brian Jackson, who's here tonight, Tanya Maria, Zap Mama, and Michelle Ndigashello, etc., etc. Meghan's been living in New York for the last decade, where she says she raises her 2 daughters, which is what I have. So do I. I have 2 children myself. And is working towards establishing a South Africa house, which will serve as a cultural center and residential space in an effort to continue sustaining South Africa's arts and culture. She's currently working with artist collectives, many of whom are street children from South Africa, and who utilize recyclable materials to create some of the most innovative and beautiful crafts. I want to thank Meghan for agreeing to act as moderator tonight. And so before I just hand over to her, I want to make one last plug, which is right after this. Not right after, later tonight. This is also a very interesting panel. It's the only panel that I've ever been to that has an after party. So, yes, you've guessed it, later tonight at 10 p.m., Boima Tucker and Eddie Stats will be DJing at Cayenne, is that how you say it? Which is on West Houghton, right, down in Soho. 125 West Houghton. And this will also serve as a kind of unofficial 50th Independence Day party for Sierra Leone. And I noticed that he did not say that it was also the independence of South Africa today, on the 27th, Freedom Day in South Africa, April 27, which in Boima's words is the perfect way to bring music and politics together in a positive way. So with that, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to hand over to Meghan.
I'll take this mic.
Oh, yeah, maybe do that.
Tighten it for me then. Hi, thank you, Sean. Can you hear me? Okay. Today's topic could have us here for days, so I've had to establish some parameters. But please feel free to ask the questions you'd like, when you're called. What I'll do, I'll briefly introduce each panelist and then ask them to expand a bit on a statement to further introduce themselves. All over the world, music has been used to communicate progressive political principles. Can you hear me now? All over the world, music has been used to communicate progressive political principles, voice the plight of the repressed, and promote solidarity, usually in the political context of its time. Today we are facing challenges equal, if not more disturbing, than those of the late 60s and 70s. Some music, however, has stood the test of time and is still relevant within the current political climate. From Curtis Mayfield, Bob Marley, Miriam Makeba, Gil Scott-Heron, Fela Kuti, Tupac Shakur, and many, many more, their messages remain applicable and as clear as ever. So the question to the panelists would be, how does this affect popular artists today, and what is their responsibility to the audience to maintain standards beyond people just having fun? And I'd also like them to consider their current work and their past work and how they integrate or have integrated into contemporary political climate, if at all. Carolina Gonzalez is a writer, teacher, and cultural critic who's worked in media, academia, and the arts for the past 2 decades. As a journalist, she's worked with the New York Daily News, San Francisco Weekly, and WNYC Radio. Currently, she most often writes about Latino arts and culture for the Viva section of the Daily News and on her blog, Sound Taste. Academically, she works on Caribbean literature and culture and currently teaches at Rutgers University. She is also developing a research project on early Dominican cultural agents. William Glasspiegel?
Sure.
Yeah? Okay. Is a
Better than
radio
I can say it.
is a radio and film producer, photographer, musician, and media artist. William has been the manager of Janka Nabe, an artist from Sierra Leone who plays a regional style of music called bubu. He also represents the Shangaan electro musicians of South Africa. He's made audiophile recordings of local music in Peru, Ghana, South Africa, and many more. He's worked for NPR Music, All Things Considered, Afropop Worldwide, MTV, and the Coca-Cola Africa Foundation. His most recent work brings him to Chicago, where he's at work on various media initiatives with artists like DJ Rashad, RP Boo, and Traxman. Edwin Houghton is a full-time DJ and music journalist who has been instrumental in breaking international sounds in the urban domain. His work on Fader Magazine 2008 Africa issue earned Best Single Issue and Best Coverage in the Atney Indie Press and Folio Awards, respectively. He's also resident DJ at one of New York's longest-running club nights, Basement Bhangra. Other highlights include writing first major stories on Drake, Sean Paul, Egyptian, and Mavado, as well as DJing MIA's first live performance. He currently works as an editor for the Roots-affiliated music network, OK Player. Masauku Chipembere is a singer-songwriter from Malawi, born in Los Angeles while his parents were in exile from Africa due to political strife. His music has an international quality that's allowed him to travel the globe performing with Stevie Wonder, Hugh Masekela, Susanna Baka, Dead Prez, Talib Kweli, and more. He's part of a popular South African duo, Black Sunshine, who performed for the World Cup in 2010 and who were nominated for a South African Music Award that same year for their latest CD, Good Life. He has an album coming out later this year, which features Brian Jackson. And then we have Brooklyn-born producer, composer, and musician Brian Jackson. Began writing songs with 20-year-old Lincoln University classmate and poet Gil Scott-Heron in 1970. Their partnership produced some of the most politically charged and soulful album of the 70s. Tracks like The Bottle, Johannesburg, It's Your World, while highly relevant back in the day, have taken on heightened new relevance today. Brian Jackson is currently working on a project which focuses on what he calls the tradition, along with collaborators and musical luminaries such as Dead Prez, Chuck D, Boots Riley, Bobby Seale, and musical partner Kentia Fraser. Brian is once again exploring and illuminating the idea that hip-shaking music has the ability to convey the timeless wisdom of the ancients, to unify and to heal. His latest album, The New Midnight Band, will hit streets early 2012 via Harlem-based Matima Records. So I'd like for them to each take time, about 4 minutes each, I think, to elaborate on that statement I made initially. Okay.
Yeah, and actually, can you just, I'm going to do the tabloid journalist thing and say, like, shrink it down, because I think
the statement?
There's a lot to talk about there, but I can only, like, at this time of the day, I can only hold like, very short thoughts in my head.
Okay, I'd like you to consider your current work and how it integrates into the political climate, right, of today. So the statement was, all over the world, music has been used to communicate progressive political principles, voice the plight of the repressed, and promote solidarity, usually in the political context of its time. Today we are facing challenges equal, if not more disturbing than those of the late 60s and 70s. Some music, however, has stood the test of time and is still relevant within the current political climate. From Curtis Mayfield, Tupac, and many more, their messages remain applicable and as clear as ever. How does this affect popular artists today, and what is their responsibility to their audience to maintain standards beyond people just having fun?
Well, I'm going to take the cliched gender privilege and go first.
Thank you.
And and especially since I know that some of the people to the left of me are going to have much more interesting things to say about this than I. But I guess one of the things that strikes me about thinking about music and politics in my work, and I'm going to put on the cultural critic / journalist hat on for a second, is, I sometimes I feel like I'm in Groundhog Day, because it just feels like I'm constantly having to fight these fights of the politics of representation, right? So just even the idea of making visible certain kinds of musical expression and the social and cultural context that they're coming out of, it feels like that's a fight that I have to keep fighting every single day and every single time, even in places where, even in outlets where I have worked in the past, and it just feels like, wait a second, didn't I write a story about the relevance of X genre of music 20 years ago, so that's a fight that you kind of constantly keep having to fight and to open up.
And a risk you have to take.
Well, I don't even think of it as risk because, frankly, I mean, I've been doing this for a really long time. I'm not going to say how much, but I've been doing this for a really long time. And I've kind of gotten to the point where it's like, I don't really feel like writing about things that I don't want to write about, and that's one of the few benefits of not being on staff anywhere, is that.
But would that not be the risk, to take the responsibility of actually doing what you want to do?
But I guess it's just that, hearing the word risk associated with it, just it's not a risk, because the risk of killing my soul is much worse to me.
Yeah.
And God knows nobody makes money out of writing about anything anyway, much less writing about music and culture. So I might as well do what I want, if I'm not going to get paid for it anyway. So, and I'm going to leave it at that.
Thank you. We'd like to continue. Brian, should we work our way down?
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of things that affect musicians and that affect people who write constantly. It never changes. There are always going to be issues that make you feel like you want to say something about them, whether they're personal issues or whether they're observations that you've made in your just in your life. When I was coming up, pretty much on a daily basis, I used to see people getting their arms eaten off by German Shepherds. So, obviously that in itself was something that made me want to say something about something. And I think that I always want to say something about something.
Right.
No matter what it is.
Right.
And whether it can be identified as political or not, I don't know. I don't care. I think that in one sense, everything. Well, we can all say this, and I think we all know that everything is political. Everything is political in the sense that you have to negotiate your way in life, and the methods that you use for that negotiation is politics.
Right.
So in that sense, I think that we are always, even if we know that we're being political or not, we always are.
But we're also faced by so many restrictions to express that political thought through music.
Yeah.
Or through
it depends.
journalism.
Well, it depends. I think we create our own restrictions. It depends on what you expect to gain, or what you expect to lose, for that matter. Your restrictions can be many, or they can be none. It all depends on what it is that you're going for, what it is that you. In my particular instance, when I started writing music, I didn't really feel any restrictions because I didn't think I was going to make any. Like you said, I didn't think I was going to make any money. Did I? No, I actually didn't. But but it's okay. That wasn't, to me. I didn't consider that a restriction. Whether or not whether anybody was going to listen, whether anybody was going to pay attention, whether they were going to pay me.
Limiting your sort of commercial appeal.
Just on the contrary, it was something that I needed to do. And after that, whatever came.
Yeah. Masauku?
Yeah. We use the word popular to me, and it's a fairly impertinent word to me in terms of music, because I sit in a tradition of music that comes down from a lot of those people. As a musician, I feel that I owe something to Curtis Mayfield and the Lightning Hopkins and to Langston Hughes and all of these other artists that came before me. My brother Brian Jackson, who's handed me a lot of beautiful, thoughtful gifts in terms of music. And in all reality, for me, popular is not important. There's a spiritual tradition that sits inside of music that has to do with really searching for something deep at the center of the human soul. And if you get lucky enough to tap into whatever that stream is, then you better let that be sacred to yourself. And music makes me cry when I write it. It touches me someplace deep in my spirit that's coming from beyond me. And that particular feeling is the greatest satisfaction I get from doing it. So my goal with it, if I can, is to take what I do, and if I get to pass it to 4 other young people who really want to know the actual tradition of the spiritual line of music that has been made and take it forward, then that's great. Because, when you think about artists like Zora Neale Hurston, there was a time period in which nobody knew about Zora Neale Hurston, and Richard Wright had said her writing was useless, and people bought that, and her presence was not even known in her time. Yeah. But what she laid down was so important that later writers like Alice Walker ended up digging it up, and a whole huge tradition has occurred that roots itself in her in this time. Had she chosen to be popular in her time and worry about that particular thing, the larger scheme of things would have been totally put askew. So for me, music and popular are 2 things I don't really associate.
And as a DJ?
I guess I have 2 answers, because I really engage music in 2 different ways. One, as a DJ, selecting it and playing it, and interacting with people, and also as a journalist writing about it. I think... Yeah, sorry. I'm a mumbler also. I apologize for that in advance. I said basically I have 2 answers because I engage music in 2 different ways. I think the DJ answer, maybe the best answer I can give, is to say that some of the things that made me want to be a DJ are some of the musical artists that have been mentioned, Bob Marley and Public Enemy and things like that. But really, a way I thought about it at the time I started DJing was there's a great essay by Paul Gilroy called One Nation Under a Groove, where he talks about the possibility for a DJ. He was talking about London in the 80s, to sort of outline a community that's a very momentary thing, like a solidarity or a collective action that really lasts for an evening or a song, and then kind of disappears. It's not a very oppressive or rigid kind of cultural nationalism that he was talking about. So that for me is a great way to think about one of the things that inspired me to start DJing. I don't know that I necessarily think about it that way every time I go to the club or something like that. As a journalist, I'm often stepping back, and there is a very political element to what I write about, and I think that has more to do with identity politics, and in the sense that a lot of, I think, what gets regular people, regular listeners excited about music is the cultural context of it, the story of it, who made it, where they're coming from, do they identify with this person? Do they see them as different from themselves? So, taking a new artist that people are excited about and kind of identifying what is it about this person's story? Is it just the music, or is it their life? That's a large part of what I do as a music journalist. Yeah.
Would you like to say something?
Sure. I guess I've just kind of 3 thoughts that are kind of echoes of what people have been saying so far. But the first thought, and I actually had this when Sean first asked me to come do this, or when Boima asked me to come do it, was that I just don't know that much about politics, and I don't even have a television. I read the paper, not as often as I should, but I do. I read the paper, And I was just thinking about politics, and then I was thinking, when people make political decisions, yes, those decisions are based around politics and their constituencies and the issues at hand. But at the end of the day, a lot of times those decisions are motivated by personal feelings, sometimes emotional feelings, sometimes inherited feelings that come from family and from culture. And I think that music, more than other, I guess, practices, is something that is just so deeply personal. Whether it's a song that gets in your head that can't leave your head, or a song that makes you cry, or a song that you create for a loved one, or a song that is your own personal expression that you end up sharing with millions of people, that itself is actually a political act, and is related to what one of the things that really motivates people to make political decisions. So that was just kind of the first thing I want to say, and then. The second thing, as me working, I've worked with a lot of different African artists over the last few years. I think that is also a political act. And it's not a political act in the sense that I'm, following all of the news and all the government issues, but I'm dealing with a political history that's problematic and fraught and multi-layered. There's a lot of people like Sean and I have talked about a guy named Hugh Tracy, who made a lot of recordings of traditional African music in South Africa. And this guy was, to a certain degree, a product of colonialism, and his work was facilitated to a certain degree by the colonialist regime. But without that regime and without Hugh Tracy, who was a bit of a paternalist, so much African culture would have been lost. So how can you do work that's important, but how can you do it in the tradition of work that's been important, but how can you kind of right the wrongs of the past and negotiate them? It's a daily struggle.
I guess that would be the politics of music.
Especially music across cultural and economic and spatial divides.
Yeah. Next. Well, music, protest songs, anti-establishment punk, conscious hip-hop, Depression-era American folk songs, slavery struggle songs, all music which basically grew out of political context all over the world, used to express things that otherwise cannot be expressed within a public domain. So what does freedom and music mean? And how does the musician marry the two? And what do the recipients of the message take from it?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, when I was looking at some of the thoughts and questions that you had, I guess one of the things that I would want us to be a little bit careful about is not falling into this sort of like nostalgia for the time that, music really directly expressed politics and that everybody enjoyed it in that way and connected to it in that way. But I think sometimes that's the danger of kind of, thinking about the good old days, and and the usual reference point for that is the 60s and the 70s. Although again, we could also refer to the 30s. And I guess one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot as I've been thinking about it is, and especially something that Masauku said a little while ago. He was talking about like how writing music moves him. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking a lot about the word movement, and movement has all these different tendrils, right? Because it's like movement. There's the movement of the spirit, like what you were talking about, and what I think, what a lot of musicians will talk about. There's also movement of the body, like there's a lot of us that are thinking a lot about music that you dance to. I mean, we're going to go to an after party where theoretically we will dance, so there's movement of the body. But there's the third element of movement that I think is the part that that we have to kind of come to terms with, which is, which music and cultural movements are connected to mass movement. Right. So for example, in the United States right now, we don't really have a mass movement to connect to. Basically we're still kind of like living the Reagan Thatcher hangover, which completely just, mutilated, just kind of like cut off that arm, and it's and I just find that it's very hard to kind of reknit that connection
But
to
how
like
do we
kind
strive
of,
to overcome that?
you know,
How do we collectively unify?
I guess it's just like I don't necessarily feel that I think asking music to do that without a connection to mass organizing is like not fair, you know. And I don't. And I would love to hear
music as politics.
Right, but I would love to hear what other folks in the panel have to say, including Will, with not knowing much about politics. You know.
But I mean, I think that music and art often deal with ambiguity and deal with, you know, sometimes you make a song and, you know, you don't know what song is going to be the hit song in your record, and the audience kind of chooses it, or the label chooses it, or whatever. So in dealing with ambiguity often, and kind of making an art of doing that, or the art is you know, playing with the spiritual realm and the realm that we don't totally understand, it isn't totally clear, it creates a strange relationship with politics where things are a little bit more cut and dry. And so for music to really mobilize people in a political way, I mean, for music to mobilize people in a political way, it almost needs to happen, not accidentally, but it needs to kind of dance around the issues, or dance towards the issues. So if you have a song that is telling someone directly, here's the message, here's what you do, I think oftentimes that's not going to appeal to people on an artistic level. But if you have a song that causes somebody else to have those ideas and to feel like they're their own ideas, that's when kind of the movement can happen.
But would not that have to be through mainstream media in order to sort of...
Yeah, but I guess my point is that it has to be, if it's just about message, it's not going to work. But if it's about a creativity and appeals to people on an emotional level, then that's the ground you need to walk on for creating the type of movement. And I think that a lot of the problem that when people marry music and politics is that it loses that spirit, you know, that kind of magic quality, and that's the challenge.
Wait, but why do you think that? Yeah, I don't understand why politics has to kind of like strip away the spiritual aura from music. You know,
I definitely don't think it has to, and certainly, you know, we're talking a lot about African music, and if you look at the history of like the griots in Mali, or, you know, especially musicians in South Africa, it doesn't. There's many cases where it doesn't do that, but I think maybe in the U.S. it's a little different. I don't know. My sense is, like, I look back at, you know, the famous statement that when Bob Dylan kind of took an anti-political stance and said, look, I want to make art. I want to make where my heart moves, my creativity. I don't want to be subject to the policies of this movement of people that, you know, are coming to my shows. I think that was actually a political decision. And showed kind of independence, and that's what we look to in our artists is independence, is a unique voice that can be a leader, not just a reflection of political agendas.
When we started out making music back in the 70s, one of our goals was to educate people. We always felt that if we were able to let people know what was going on, that you know, if they had more information, that they would be able to draw some of their own conclusions. That didn't always happen, but what I've come to believe at this point is that change is an individual thing. Change has to happen on a more microcosmic level than I had anticipated. We tried to make big changes. We tried to make changes in large amounts of people. And what we ended up doing was making changes to one person at a time. And so what I'm saying is that I don't think that revolutionary music is exactly the way we thought it was in the 70s, the way we had anticipated being in the 70s. I think now the challenge is to reach inside of us and find out what our problems are in interacting with other individuals, interacting with ourselves, and interacting with the world and with society. If we can talk about those things on a more personal level, then maybe we can begin to understand to be aware of our similarities instead of our differences. Because at some point we all get down to a basic level. And when we understand that, when music makes us understand that, and we begin to commune, especially in a live situation, it always comes down to a basic level that's almost wordless at some point. And when that happens, something else goes on that I think I don't know if we can actually name it. I don't know what it is, but there needs to be more of it. It's because it's healing. And this is what I'm trying to do. This is what I think where I think we need to go. And if we stop looking at making huge changes, maybe the smaller changes are actually more important, more significant.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think that right now, different songs about relationships are important. Songs that point to a different respect for women are really insanely important right now. Songs that point to a different respect for children, their voices, the time we spend with them. Those type of songs are hugely important because the disconnect is the main issue. I spent some time this week at my son's school, and actually in my daughter's class. It's a kindergarten class, and I put 2 words on the board for them, the words creative and the words destructive. And then I asked them as a class, randomly, how many people like war? 14 hands shoot up, 13 of them are boys, right? And 1 girl, And then, how many people like peace? A few tentative hands kind of walk up, like 8, 7 kids are like, I like peace. Mostly girls, And you check it out. How many people like Star Wars? Boom! The hands come flying up.
Star Wars.
Everybody knows about Star Wars. Star Wars Clone Wars. They've made a new one for the new generation. So, all the hands shoot up. We all like Star Wars Clone Wars. Okay, how many people like stars? Okay. Oh, the hands shoot up. Now, how many people, let's talk about this again. How many people, then we had the discussion. Okay, so in war, who dies in war? Well, clones, that kind of thing. Okay, but in real war, who dies? Well, I guess people. Okay, so if they're people, then they're mommies and daddies and brothers and sisters and uncles and aunties, grandmas and grandpas, right? Yes. Is that a good thing when those people die? Think about the ones that you love. Is it a good thing? Do you think that would be a good thing? No. Well, let's try it again. How many people like war? The hands get a little more tentative, But it's just, they go to school, they learn the ABCs, they learn this and that, and we pretend to a degree that they're not at the same time going home to watch Star Wars Clone Wars. If you watch your kids these days when they're busy at play, especially the boys, they got a sword out and they're slashing something. They got a gun out and they're shooting something. I turn to my son all the time. I said, what'd you just kill there? I saw you there with your block turned into a gun. Who got blown away? And he stops and he's kind of like, I didn't really even notice I was doing that, Dad. So there's a whole bunch of very little, that it's a weird thing to be in a society that teaches its kids that it's okay to dig war and then asks itself later, well, what's the problem? Because those kids who grow up digging war and thinking it's okay to dig war, are going to grow up to support war or not or lack a certain sensitivity that's required to be a human being. So a lot of the conversation that we had was just about the idea of how beautiful it is to be creative instead of destructive. And I asked the question in the class, has anybody here ever been in a war? One kid's hand shot up. And he was one of the kids who said he liked war. And I actually was sort of like, you've been in a war? And he said, yes, I was in Afghanistan. I went there last year. I had to go there. And I'm like,
He said
wow.
that?
Yeah, he was in Afghanistan. I found out later his father had been killed in Afghanistan, and they had to go there and retrieve the body, and he went to Afghanistan. And, he's 5 years old, trying to process the fact that his father died in Afghanistan, that he likes Star Wars, Clone Wars.
But you've traveled, you've lived here, you've lived abroad. What would you say the similarities are within our struggles?
To find out, like, how hard it would be just to get people in this room to reach over to the person next to them and honestly hold their hands and just go, I'm happy that we're alive. Like, we're looking for huge, gigantic things to change, where just a basic hug at this point is an oddity, And so for me, I'm looking in music as a musician. What I'm looking for out of my music right now is sometimes the ability to go, I'm a guy and I'm sensitive. I cry about a lot of stuff, and it's all right.
But that's why I think it's interesting.
And I love my children.
To conceive of the musical body as political.
Yeah, but that's political.
Yeah,
it's very political for me as a man
activity
to write a
as
song and
political
say, I love my children.
Yeah.
I respect my wife. I believe in peace. Sounds real simple, but when does that get played on the radio?
Thank you. Does anyone else like to say something? Would you like to open to the floor? Sean?
Oh, yes. I could testify to that.
Well, actually, just to follow up on that, because that was actually exactly the same thought I was having. That, one of the contradictions that we live with is that I happen to dance to and enjoy listening to stuff that if I stop for a second to pay attention to the lyrics, I would just run away screaming in shame. But so and this is a contradiction, and not necessarily that one. Has to, that you shouldn't have great danceable cooking songs about, respecting your wife and loving your kids and just being happy to be alive. But it's, as a listener, as a critic, as whatever, sometimes I don't know what to do with that contradiction, that it's like, that some of the stuff that I'm like, darn, that sounds really good, and I can't. Yeah, but or somebody that, and I'm not going to mention any names of any musicians that are very well known and very hip and very multi-culty, whatever. No, I'm not going to say. But, it's like sometimes you have musicians that are kind of trying to represent themselves as being very political, and then they open their mouth and they say the most ignorant stuff. So it's like, you kind of want to tell them, shut up and go back to making music, and it's like I prefer the ambiguity of the song to the directness of your really badly informed politics,
MIA, obviously.
No. That thread sailed a long time ago. That discussion thread sailed a long time ago. But
well, I don't know. My response as a musician is to try and fix that. Because music is. If you look at different levels of music, okay, like say for instance a film, there's the visual. And then on top of that, in the same film, there's also the audio, and so when you create a piece, there can also be another level that talks about that you can put anything on, that you can put another level of consciousness on, not audio, not visual, but conceptual, and so that's I think that's part of what I consider my job. the music almost doesn't matter. You know, you can use any music that you want, but it's what you say.
Yep.
If you can combine those two things, and you can, it's simple enough to do. It's just that not enough people are doing it.
Not enough people are listening.
I wouldn't say that not enough people are doing it as much as that, Clear Channel Media is not going to present it to the people.
Yeah,
Right.
That's
Really?
right.
So
That's
that's
true.
mainstream
That's
media.
true.
But how relevant is Clear Channel Media today?
In the sense
control
that
the radio station.
exposure. It's about exposure.
I don't listen to the radio.
My kids do.
I know, but it's like, I mean, I don't listen
They
to the
hear it
radio.
somewhere.
Like I get my music passed on, like in a bunch of different ways that has nothing to do with the radio. And I
Me
think
too.
that's the case for a number of people.
Me too, but I still think
You
that
know?
for me, primarily, I'm in a tradition. I'm in a tradition, and I'm trying to pass down a tradition. And the tradition that I'm trying to pass down or expand upon is one that was set up by folks like him and Gil. And how many people know the song "The Bottle" by Gil Scott-Heron and Brian Jackson? How many people know that song? How many people have danced? You can dance to that song on a dance floor, yet it's a song about drug addiction and getting and being in some pretty hectic spaces. It wakes you up to a whole reality of a certain time. I mean, Fela Kuti has Bob Marley. There's a billion people we can name that we've been busy dancing to for a long time. Like when he was saying earlier about sometimes the message overburdening you. I'm like, no, I think that when you look at a Bob Marley, I grew up like many of you probably going Buffalo Soldier. Rasta. My daughter does it now, Buffalo Soldier. She doesn't know what she's singing. She's just singing the song and whoa, whoa, whoa. She likes it. It's happy. It catches on. And then one day she's going to wake up later on and go, wait a minute, she's talking about these Africans who were forced to kill Native Americans and da-da-da, Wow, this guy had put all of that in the song Exodus, the song Exodus. I listened to it as a kid all the time because it has spacey sounds in it. To dance around in my room at 10 going bananas to it because of the sounds in the music. But as I grew up and evolved with that music, I came to a point later where I was like, wow, this man is talking about the history of a people and its need to transcend slavery and all of these other things. But he made it really delicious to listen to.
But do you think that all music sort of has to have a message?
I think that even when music doesn't have a message, it has a message. Mm-hmm. So, when the Black Eyed Peas come out, saying, what's the song my kids liked? They like that, I'll spend my money, Mazel Tov. What's that song called? I Got a Feeling. My kids liked that song a lot. They really dug it. And then I asked my son to ask one of the kids that I know tends to be clever in his class. So what did your boy think about that? What did Malcolm think about that? He said he liked the song. And he said, well, did he think it's a good song? He said, well, it's a stupid song. It's a stupid song,
right.
But I like it.
Yeah.
And then after a couple weeks,
after
a couple weeks, he went back to Malcolm. Malcolm was like, I don't dig it anymore. It's just stupid. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And if we're ready to take some questions from the panel, from the audience.
So I guess my question would be, yes, the ideal is that an artist will make a music that can heal or soothe or be political or whatever. But for every artist who does that, there's an artist who I think probably doesn't care.
Right.
There's 10.
Regardless. So then back to the original question, what's the responsibility of musicians to do it? Is there a responsibility of musicians to do it? And if there is, who's going to enforce that?
Mm-hmm.
I think once you're aware of the responsibility, it's very difficult not to assume it.
Yeah.
So that's also part of the part of the mission, if you call it, to reach out to musicians, to reach out to especially to young musicians, and make them aware that there is actually a mission involved in creating music. Masauku talked a few times about the tradition, and that is the tradition. The tradition of music. The tradition of music is to impart message, impart knowledge, impart history. That's what the original function of music was. So whenever I come across young musicians, I try to impart that sense of what music is for.
Let me add that. Going back even further, as an African, my people used music to bring rain out of the sky. We used it to take negative energies out of people. Even now in Malawi, we have a dance called Vimbuza, and they'll take a mentally ill person to a Vimbuza, and they'll spend time using certain rhythms and certain medicinal herbs and so forth, and they'll go through this whole practice where eventually, a lot of times, people get healed of all sorts of mental and spiritual burdens. So when I think about music, I think the danger is there's this belief that the artist is burdened with having to be political or whatever, but nobody thinks about the idea that, to a degree, at least for me, the way I was taught this thing, I study it. It's a science to a degree, and for me, it goes way back to this place called ancient Kemet, and those people called the scribes, and then you have the Jali and these folks. And a lot of what it was about is the idea of a thing called word sound power. The Rastas write about it, which is that a lot of these things we say and we put into the universe, the energy that gets created, as we say, it can't get destroyed. It goes somewhere. So that if I'm putting energy out into the universe that is beautiful, it's likely to bring beauty around me. Let me give you an example. This sister sitting right here, I had a conversation with today, two things. Today on my way here, I was walking here I was coming from work and I was kind of in a funny head. And I came out of the 2 train to go to the D train to speed up somewhere at Atlantic Station. And there was a kora player playing in the subway. And the sound was emanating. And as soon as I came around a certain corner, my whole spirit went, whoa, I'm entering a whole nother vibration now. And I know that other people might have felt that. They may not have known what it is. But as soon as I walked by that guy, I looked at him, he looked at me, I put my hands in a prayer position and bowed to him because I realized that he was opening the door to the next energy space that I was traveling to be here with you. Now, that sister right there, just last week ago, she works in an Ethiopian restaurant, and we had a conversation. You didn't know I was going to be here, right? Okay.
Oh, this is Martha.
Yeah, she right? But we had a conversation, and I looked at her, and her energy was very clear. And I was like, wow, your energy's clear. And she said, yeah, that's interesting you say that, because I'm going through a spiritual cleansing time right now. And I was thinking, wow, you know what? I'm going through that too. There's certain habits that I'm finding right now that I've had for a while that I just have to leave behind. Something in the universe is telling me it's not time to have those habits anymore.
Exactly.
How many people are getting that call
Yep.
from somewhere?
Yep.
Right? That's going around.
Do you
So,
feel that too, Eddie? In the dance scene, I mean the
Do I-
music in the dance hall,
Do I feel what?
like the cleansing that's happening, sort of shifting and changing attitudes.
I mean, there's definitely a very cathartic element
Yeah.
to it. I don't know. My head was in a different part of what he was saying, so I don't know exactly how to figure that out.
but I just wanted to finish with her. We ended up having this conversation around healing that I took with me, and it was like, okay, that was the message for the day. The cleansing, the healing, the clarity, move in that direction. So why is she here now? I can either not see that or understand that, okay, that kora player, her coming here, there's something else that happens besides the physical reality that's going on that's trying to tell me some things.
Cannon's wife.
So, you're Cannon's wife? That is hilarious, yo. That is just, whoa, whoa. Later on, that'll just, whoa.
Thank you.
Actually, I'm gonna take the privilege again, but we'll get to you in a second. Because actually, one of the things that I would love to hear from Stats about is, we work for the publications and the venues that you work for are kind of very different from a lot of the places that I've been working at. A lot of a lot of time. And, you know, I think earlier in the panel, one of the things you had said was that people want to know the history and the origin and that sort of like sound, you know, like the sound genealogies, like where does this sound come from? Where does this style of music come from? And frankly, I kind of feel a little the opposite, that it's like you're spending a lot of time, or certainly like in the context that I find myself in a lot of times, it's like you're doing a lot of really, really basic education, and then people are like, oh, okay, that's cool, and then they move on, and you know, you're spending a lot of time trying to connect dots for people.
That's not what I meant. Actually.
Okay, I'm sorry. So then, can you clarify?
Sure. I mean, I do think that people, you know, in what I do as a writer, I am, you know, a lot of times digging into sound genealogy and the, you know, the past of, especially of like small subcultures. A lot of what I do for Faders, like you kind of parachute into like this subculture that's kind of insular and try to be an ambassador for it, or, you know, sort of amateur anthropologist for it, for this audience that's out there. But actually what I said was that I think that a lot of what sells records, gets people excited about records, is, you know, maybe echoing some of the things that Brian and other people said, is not just sonic qualities or music qualities, although that's obviously really important, but it's also whether you identify with the experience of the person who's making the music.
Right.
What's their story? Are they reacting against something culturally? So a lot, I mean, it's very different for different stories, but I think that's a lot of what, you know, even though what I do is not overtly political, it ultimately, like if you're writing about MIA or if you're writing about Kwaito in South Africa, a lot of what makes kids in South Africa excited about Kwaito is not that different from reggaeton.
Exactly.
But so you know, what makes it Kwaito and what makes it their music is all about the ideas about it, and what does it mean to listen to Kwaito and be South African? Does it mean you're from the township as opposed to, you know, another suburb or something like that? So that's kind of what I meant, not so much deep history maybe, but as...
No, I didn't mean deep. I mean, like,
Yeah.
there's only so deep you can go, is like in 800 words, you know.
2 hours.
Yeah.
Someone had a question?
My question is, as far as like hip-hop, reggae, urban music, kind of, should we be dismissing, like forms of hip-hop where women are disrespected, where there's drug use, where there's, I guess, people referring to themselves with the N-word? Should we dismiss that as not being political, as being garbage? Because I think there's also a message in what's going on. Where is it coming from?
Yeah, please.
I think art in general, especially music and film, has kind of a cathartic role in our society. And so, you know, I'm like watching action movies, or I like watching horror movies. Is some guy getting slashed up in a horror movie bad politics? Some people say it is. But I think having that kind of critical distance to say, okay, this is a song, or this is something I'm dancing to and not really paying attention, is actually part of the beauty of, you know, being able to enjoy things that may not be the way you want to live your life. So again, if somebody says something that's pushing the edges, like listening to some of this like Odd Future band that everyone's talking about right now, yeah, it makes me, some of the lyrics like about rape or about suicide, they make me uncomfortable. And I remember listening to Lil Wayne at first, and I felt the same way. But I think that that's actually an important thing that music does, is it makes us face up to these, it makes us see these things, and it kind of creates a place for them so that we can, in some ways, you know, enjoy them or learn from them, but not necessarily embody them ourselves.
Yes.
Absolutely,
Yes.
is a privilege.
I would say that, you know, for you, for my personal opinion, for you as a woman, if it hurts your soul, to rail against it, fight against it, start a movement against it, do everything in your power to make sure that other voices are available and that everybody around you questions it. Because, yes, I do think that sort of energy participates in the sort of patriarchal society that we exist in. I have a 6-year-old daughter. I'm not down with that. I don't want to hear brothers talk about smacking women around, disrespecting women. My wife also does most of her work on Sarah Bartman, so I'm very aware of the sort of, a lot of what the consciousness Lil Wayne is in was created for Lil Wayne to be in. Do you know what I mean? I've also been signed to these record companies where I've actually had them tell me, you know, those lyrics you have in there about revolution, why don't we take those out? I think the song will be more appealing if we get rid of that and just kind of keep it to the good, fun-loving stuff. That actually happens. People don't believe that happens, but I sat across the table from Ron Fair, who is the guy behind the Black Eyed Peas, and he looked at me and he told me these exact words. There's some lyrics in that song I don't like. The part where you say, wake up and start your revolution, wake up, it's always you that's losing, I don't like that part. I've got $150,000 to put behind this song as a single on your record if you're willing to take out those lyrics. Now, of course, we're in a 50-50 creative deal. You can leave them in. But if you leave them in, the song just, we don't see it, the company doesn't see it as a single. And if a album doesn't have a single, an artist ends up in the 99-cent bin. We didn't make a deal. It's okay. He likes his Land Rover. He likes his class bracket. And for me, I was a much younger person. At that point, I really thought that Sony Music or RCA should fund my revolution. As a grown-up person, that's a stupid concept. But no, I think that music right there, if you're going through it, it needs to be said. Malcolm X was once a pimp and a pusher. You know what I mean? So everything has its place in a trajectory. People change, people grow through saying what they have to say. But if what you're saying is assaulting me in the present, I'm going to kick, I'm going to fight, I'm going to rail against it. Because I'm a human being and I have a right.
To counteract everything.
But the fact that it's stupid as an adult, like whatever you just said, that it's stupid. I mean, why is it stupid? I really feel like, you know, there's those record companies that are pushing a certain kind of music in a certain kind of abundance rather than your music, for example, in a greater abundance, right? So I appreciate your comment that, okay, let's enjoy the occasional slasher film, but I feel like with music it's a little bit different because that's the most popular stuff that we're listening to. That's what's getting pushed out there.
I think movies are more popular than
movies
music.
too. I mean, I just feel like that kind of stuff gets pushed out more than, let's say, the more conscientious type,
But
you know, non-disrespectful.
But I think what he was getting at is that expecting, you know, a money-making business to fund your revolution is stupid. And I'm totally behind that.
Right.
It's like, you know, it's
Right.
like,
not a revolution, but to let's say, okay, let me back up for a second. But the music, right? So your music needs to be changed if it's going to become more widespread, rather than lyrics that disrespect women, for example. You know, that I feel like that there's a problem there when music that gets put out there that's disrespectful more so than.
Well, I mean, the way
It's an economist, but.
I look at it, I mean, I think the problem there is the economy and the access rather than the music so much, because you know you have a system that's kind of selecting for one thing or foregrounding one thing. So to me, that's not so much, you know, the response to that is not to say, well, you shouldn't make certain songs about certain things or express that, but to try to alter the economics of it, or better yet, to fund music that says something different, or to find. I mean, for me myself, I'm more comfortable with saying, you should say what you're thinking. You should say what you're thinking, and have music that reflects that, rather than to say to an artist, you shouldn't say that. You know, like you shouldn't,
Right.
because.
I think I'm saying the same thing as you.
Right.
I didn't say it very well.
Yeah.
I'm not as.
I mean, we're all sort of.
That's my point, is that the economy behind the songs is what drives them to be more heard than, let's say, others.
Sure.
Right.
but just to kind of switch slightly, you know, because I was trying to think of a really good music industry example, and I can't, but I've been reading a lot of the reviews of the new Malcolm X biography. And, you know, so David Remnick in New Yorker writes this piece that is not at all about Manning Marable's book, and it's totally all about Alex Haley's book. But it was, one of the things that was interesting is that, you know, Alex Haley proposes, you know, to, I can't remember what the original publisher was. You think, no, Grove was the one that picked it up, but I forget who the original publisher was. And so he proposes, like, okay, this guy is hot. And it's like, this guy's hot because he's controversial and he's stirring up trouble. So, you know, the idea of revolution was a marketing point. You know, it's like, you know, black people are going to want to read this because they're into, you know, his message, and white people are going to want to read this because they're into trying to figure out what the heck is going on with the black people. So it was like the perfect plan. So he writes the autobiography of Malcolm X. Malcolm gets killed right before it comes out. And then, you know, and Remnick reproduces the letter that Alex Haley sends to his publisher immediately after that and says, like, you know, and the gist of it is like, it's really sad that Malcolm died, but now this book will be even hotter, you know. And sure enough, it was. And it was so hot that the publisher freaked out that they were going to get firebombed, drops it. Grove Press picks it up. And Grove Press was this press that in the 70s actually put out a lot of, I don't want to say revolutionary literature, but they kind of cornered that market. So there's like a lot of great, amazing books that came out in the 60s and 70s from Grove Press that are now sort of like the classics of that. So, you know, if you are in a particular social moment in which revolution is where it's like people think that
I have to stop you for a second.
Wait, no.
You didn't mention the three chapters that got taken out.
What
about the chapters that got taken out?
Well, I don't even want to get into that because honestly, like, my point is that if you are in a social moment in which some kind of revolution sells, then the business that is trying to make money and trying to sell you something will say, like, yes, we will invest in that. But it's like there is no benefit in investing in because the market is not seen as sort of like either controversial, explosive, whatever. Then what is the point of investing in really lovely music that is giving spiritual message and that is trying to change one person at a time? You know.
Thank you, Carolina. Question in the back.
She didn't deal with that whole issue, though. That's important.
Yes.
I read.
Speak up, please, darling. Guys.
The whole thing.
Off of what the was saying and off of what Willis was saying.
Right.
In terms of the movies, you get to pay $13 to see a movie. People are not going 10 times.
Well, it's on TV. I mean, it's on the internet.
But even the movie, they're not gonna play 10 times a day. This movie we want to see a slasher film. But now when you have movies like, you know, really aggressive, misogynistic, urban, you know, like hip hop songs or reggaeton songs, you hear that on the radio. It plays like every 35 minutes the song is playing.
Right.
You can listen to any station for an hour, and I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find any one song that has a positive messaging. So then it is political in the sense that why is that music being okayed or greenlighted to get put on the album to get released as a single, but not anything else? And then I can go to Z100 or 95 or WPLJ, and I can hear, like, you know, a song like, you know, a Great Escape song or a positive song by an alternative, you know, Caucasian band. But when you turn to like urban stations, you don't get those positive, free living. You don't get that music there. So it is political as to, you know, people question as to why
cultural assassination
that music gets greenlighted and not the positive. You know, wake up, start your revolution music.
Well, I have a question for you. We all know that basically what is going to be consumed is whatever the media decides, whatever your multinational corporations decide is going to be sold. So why is it that they choose why is it that they decide to put out this kind of music?
My personal opinion.
Yeah.
It's political. I mean, it's sort of like what I'm sorry, I'm gonna mess up the pronunciation of the name. I don't need to.
Masauku.
Mm-hmm. So sort of like what you were saying, when you start kids from a very young age, and that's what they come up with. So when you have young kids and it's constantly 10, 20 times a day, 10 times an hour, they're listening to the same message. It's sort of like a brainwash. Yeah. That's what you're gonna, that's what you're gonna remember. That's the behavior that you're gonna be okay with. That's why now, with Chris Brown coming back and he's trying to release his album and he's trying to make a comeback, but it's just like, you know what? How about you really come up to the media and really, project or make us believe that you're really sorry for what happened, address what happened. They don't push you for that. Why? Now, if it had been another artist or someone else, then maybe better PR people. That's what I chalk it up to. But those are questions that are not answered or not asked in terms of like what I feel in urban music.
Yeah.
It's not.
But I think until we collectively unify and stand together, I don't think we will succeed in overcoming that. Because like Gil and Brian used to talk about, there's different forms of assassination, and ultimately we're going through a process of self-assassination. It's cultural assassination, We're doing it to ourselves, perpetuating that same sort of...
Well, I think the specific reality of urban radio that you're talking about, that there's something very concrete that changed, for instance, in New York when the laws about the FCC changed under Clinton. And so what the effect that you're talking about is a direct result of policy that was set by the federal government that changed the number of stations that could be owned by a single corporation. And that's kind of what we're talking about, Clear Channel and MS and the kind of homogenous programming that's drowning out maybe other voices. And I, having been in New York before and been in New York after, I can tell you, and I'm sure a lot of people here can testify, what the range of sounds, the range of messages and viewpoints and things that you heard on the radio in New York before that legislation was passed totally changed. I mean, it maybe wasn't an overnight change because some of those alternative stations struggled on for a while, and there's still WBII and other voices. But, that's something that I'm glad you said that, because in a way that's something very concrete that people who live in New York or in any community should think about and address when they vote, when they, engage politics in a really direct way. And I think that's important to talk about because often we attack or criticize artists and hold them responsible for things that we should really be holding policymakers responsible for. And even attacking Clear Channel. I mean, Clear Channel is basically a machine to make money. They're going to do what they're going to do. I think the direct difference between what we'd like to hear and what we're hearing has more to do with the policy, which we as voters and citizens can do something about, as opposed to, I don't know, maybe we're making it more cosmic than it needs to be in a sense.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Next.
We've been talking about like the sense of commercial and alternative, but I think also there's certain musical groups that have tried to frame their message in popular and commercial music. I've talked so many times with Sean about this, and I'm going to say it, I have to mention it. I'm from Colombia, and Choco is one of those examples. They're not even in an really urban center in Colombia, but they use hip-hop and like rhythms that you can dance. So you're in Bogota, and like people from Bogota didn't have a clue about Choco and like Afro-Colombians. But with them, you start dancing, they've won Grammys, they've become so mainstream, and their message is coming across. So I don't think you necessarily have to put like those divisions. And the other thing is the use you put for it. One is also for class for Sean. I did this analysis about him playing in Cuba, and his songs are so corny. But the way he put the use of just saying they have the right as other people for music gave it a completely different context. Then you have like the example of Mexico with the narco corridos, which have this really strong message about like these experiences of these sometimes drug landlords. Even in Colombia, there's also this kind of norteña, and you listen it throughout Central America, Latin America. But the people that are listening don't really know like what's going on and what are the political implications of this kind of music. So I don't know. So and that happens a lot with very local music that you want to share a certain message, but then it doesn't, in other places it doesn't come across. So it can't be that like division of, I just wanted to point that out, and what do you think?
But I think it's really funny that you mentioned Choco Town because I have them in my notes. And they're a really good example of how when we move outside of the U.S. context, you have much clearer lines drawn between what is acceptable and what's not, and the things that you're going to be persecuted for. Because it's like in Colombia, and I can't remember the name of the documentary, maybe you do, but there's like this great documentary about Colombian rap that focuses a lot, I think, in Cartagena. And what's awesome, and you see this in in the reception of rap in a lot of different parts of the world, that rap was this completely oppositional music because the state identifies it as the music of, troublemakers and the music of indeseables, of undesirables, and people who are rappers are, quite literally persecuted. And when you have those kind of situations, and Colombia is a great example of that. Well, if you know you're going to get the crap beat out of you for being a rapero, then all of a sudden being a rapero is a political thing.
Right.
So in those contexts, it's a very different thing. And you're talking about the narco corridos, and the narco corridos are really fascinating because they are like, it's a really good analog to gangster rap because they're like really documenting these incredibly violent situations. And there's all this really interesting stuff about how, how a lot of these singers are either courted or threatened by the narcos. It's like, you better write something flattering about me, but not mention me by name. But people will know that you're talking about me and that you're praising me, and I don't care how you really feel about me, but you better write a really good song about me. And they're like incredibly catchy,
Thank you. Yes?
Yeah. My name is Damien. Thank you all for being here tonight. I actually just have sort of a question about this, I guess, this working definition of political. I'm not like an academic, so maybe it's just my ignorance, but I guess this idea about why is it that, for example, like in terms of talking about music and the connection between music and politics, why is it that it can't just be entertainment, and entertainment itself can't be political, and like like Johnny Clegg versus TKZ versus DJ Mujaba, like there's a very interesting history in terms of these artists being out on this global or sort of international musical kind of position, and I guess my question, maybe because I do think that each panel has kind of touched on this notion or this idea, this kind of working definition of music and politics, for each of your own positions within, I guess, this sort of this systemic and like the industries, these positions that give power and voice to artists, and trying to maybe turn the question around from just what is the responsibility of people in the industry and are making music, but actually what are your all's like sort of individual understanding or sort of interpretation of consumer or people's agency in terms of the politics. Does that make sense?
Very much so.
But yeah, like people's agency and how people actually extrapolate meaning and generate their own idea of politics.
You're talking about like the music listener, music consumer?
Yeah, the recipient.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, a listener, but also reader as well.
Yeah.
Right?
That's hard. I mean, I guess the music is out there, and then we choose how to respond to it. One way is to listen to and say, oh, that's entertainment, that's not real life. I'm just going to dance to that. Another way is to say, I'm not going to listen to that. I'm going to make my own kind of music that's not this message, and that's actually inspired by this message to like make something different. I don't know. I can speak from my personal perspective, which is that I've tried to, I enjoy Lil Wayne a lot, and I think he's brilliant.
Me too.
But I wouldn't want to make my living off his music, and I wouldn't want to be known as someone who did that necessarily, because I'd rather do something else, and I probably would do a lot better if I'd have a lot more money if I wanted to work with music like Lil Wayne's necessarily. But the music that I've ended up working with is a lot more challenging to market, but I think is important to market, and that's why I do what I do, because I think it's important to share sounds with people and share places with people that they've never been and that they've never heard before. And I think that as an artist, that's actually going to lead towards more creativity, and that's what motivates me.
Love it.
Where to start? I think that the question of responsibility is still sort of hovering behind that, and I don't know if I think maybe the thread that's been running through some of the answers. Feel free to correct me if I'm putting words in your mouth, but I think, not to say that artists don't have a responsibility, but in some way the responsibility they have is ethical or human in the same way that we all have a responsibility. Mm-hmm. And if you try to put the expectation of a specific political responsibility on it, you're asking something of music that's that's not appropriate to music.
Endorse it.
But I do think, again, and this is sort of where I started off my answer. I think for me, part of the reason I became a DJ, not the whole reason, but writing about music, engaging music actively, semi-actively as a DJ is partly about changing that top-down equation of there's sort of a central broadcasting system that just puts out a message and the rest of us consume it passively. And I think a lot of what DJing as a culture about is really trying to change or reverse that equation, taking what's basically a consumer product and tailoring it to fit your needs or to add your own dialogue to it. And I think that that for me is kind of where the balance comes in. It's not so much that we should lay out there are themes or messages that music should have, and you should criticize artists if they don't have them, or it's wrong, but more that we should make that conversation more of a conversation, have other voices, the voices that aren't heard, be heard more. Start with yourself. I think kind of the idea.
Please.
I think one of the things that we often do is we fail to see our own power, and you have to ask yourself, when things happen, why are they necessary? Why was MTV necessary in 1980 when Bob Marley was the biggest global artist on the planet? Why was it necessary? Maybe it was necessary because the message coming through the radio at the time, talking about get up, stand up, talking about one love, talking about revolution in Zimbabwe and survival, exodus, it was terrifying for the systems of government that found out white kids, black kids, Latino kids, all over the world, wherever you go, Bob Marley is an icon to everybody. Mm-hmm. And they needed to do something about that. And the only way they could do something about that was to put MTV out and make people move into a visual identification with an artist. Because when the artist came through the radio, you just liked the music, right? Now, they created MTV and thought it was solved. The main catch, you got rid of the Bob Marley image. Bob Marley was saying he was a power guy. Now, as a black cat, what I found fascinating with MTV is you really didn't see yourself there for a while. And when you finally did see yourself, as much as I love Prince, you were seeing yourself as either Prince or Michael Jackson. And
wrong with that.
no, but we had went from get up, stand up to controversy to being sort of half naked. And it's not that that's not part of the deal. Great, that's part of the deal. Why was it prioritized? Why were the first dudes that you saw on MTV very unpolitical and very more androgynous? Why was that? Why did we go from that Bob Marley image to that? And then you go a few years later, and all of a sudden this thing called Yo MTV Rap shows up. And it's this small little show on MTV that should get no time. But all of a sudden it becomes the most damn popular show on MTV. A few other networks pick up on it and start going, oh, they don't want to deal with those black kids saying all that crazy stuff. And they start their own video music boxes and BETs and other things. And then all of a sudden MTV goes, you know what? We might need to make room for those rappers because we're not going to survive with this white supremacy right now. It's not going to work, right? Now you get up into the mid-90s when you have this moment where all of a sudden the FCC has to change all the laws. Who are the biggest rappers? They're cats like Tupac and Biggie who are saying to the black community, don't just shoot people in your hood. You mean you're going to shoot your homeboys, but when the cop comes up, you're going to act like a wimp? You better shoot him too. You better get more revolutionary about how you're trying to live. Now, I'm not trying to agree with that or disagree with that, but I do see how a system all of a sudden goes, wow, we need to come up with a new way to control radio because people are getting a little bit rebellious on us. Do you see what I'm saying? So there's this place in which we see these things happen and wonder why these things happen, but a lot of it is happening because we are actually becoming more conscious. We are actually pushing these buttons. We are actually forcing the system to go, I need new ways to fight. Right now, I think all these major record companies are dying partly because it's kind of weird to go, well, you mean, one is that Michael Jackson, before he died, had kind of bought a good portion of Sony before he was, some people say he was killed. Dick Gregory says he was killed because he bought a good portion of Sony. Some believe it, some don't. But bottom line is, it seems to me that the artists, that Jay-Z's owning all kinds of huge amounts of money and moving into various businesses, the artists have come to a place where they're starting to own a whole lot, and having major record companies is getting difficult because you can't keep the same agenda when people from the streets start moving into these big industries. Even now, the 50 Cent, as much as he's crazy, he's just started a whole nother record label for a whole nother type of hip-hop music. He's saying, I don't think this thing that I'm doing is going to stay in style forever. I want to sign some conscious artists. I want to sign people who do something totally different than what I do. I'm growing up. So it's really the major industries falling apart. Some of it has to do with the fact that they don't like the fact that we're actually moving in on them. And oftentimes we don't see that because they're bombarding us with this music all day long. But there's other things happening. Last thing is the thing she said about how music travels globally. Everywhere I go, the effect of Public Enemy in hip-hop is well felt. If you go to South Africa, Malawi, when I was in Europe, all through Europe, everybody really wanted the real hip-hop. It's only right here where it started in a lot of places, in a lot of ways, where people have forgotten that conscious element. In Cape Town townships, he'll tell you there's workshops going on, there's people changing the lives of kids with DJing, all sorts of things are happening. When you get into the global consciousness of what's happening with hip-hop and go to specific places, Brazil, all these different places, you'll find there's always some dope stuff going on, and there's always somebody using it to challenge the system.
I like that word conscious a lot better than I like the word political, because there might be a tendency for political music to be the kind of music that agrees with our politics. What we call political music might be the music that has the message that we agree with. And I don't know if that's. I don't know if I could take the most horrendous situations and get some political meaning out of it. So I mean, every piece of music, everything that happens in the world, there's a lesson to be learned from it. It's our responsibility to decide what those lessons are and to put them together in some type of a cohesive fashion. That all I have to say is thank God for laptops and Logic.
And there's actually been like a lot of really great stuff said, and like every time somebody speaks, I kind of keep changing what I want to say. Yeah, and it's like, and I'm really grateful for Brian's point, because it's like, let's think about all the times that like all these cases that we've seen of sort of like politicians kind of trying to co-opt certain kinds of music, and then in some cases the artists fight back, in some cases the artists acquiesce, and so on. So there is this sort of like implied politics in a lot of different genres of music. And I always find it so funny that, country music in the United States is a lovely thing. But the rise of country music as a sort of popular mass genre is like coincides precisely with the moment that the white mainstream feels threatened by the dark hordes. And again, there's a lot of country artists that are doing some really interesting stuff, some very self-aware, self-conscious, politicized stuff, but it's been really funny, like that coincidence. But my original thought is like thinking about this connection between music and politics and how I define it. When I was a kid in the Dominican Republic and I really liked the Rolling Stones, I didn't realize that was a political choice, that it was a political choice that either kind of aligned, depending on how you read it, either aligned me with this sort of like brainwashed, culture from the United States and England is better kind of thing, or was this sort of like oppositional thing, I'm looking for something that's alternative to the mainstream culture. I don't know. I was a kid. And the thing that kind of made me somebody who was cared about social justice issues had nothing to do with music. But my involvement with social justice issues did shape part of my taste in music, Yeah. So it's like, are there certain things that everybody is listening to? And, it's like, and I was thinking about this. I was like, my first appreciation of African music came when I was in college, and I'm giving away my age now. And it was the start of the anti-apartheid movement in the United States. And this is how I discovered African music, as, so, yeah, I would say sort of like my political involvement did shape somewhat of my taste in music. And I was also thinking about friends of mine that were, combatants in the war in El Salvador, and them talking about sitting in, sitting up in the hills and listening to Led Zeppelin, and that was their like political rally music. So it's like this is not what Led Zeppelin was intended to be, but it's it's also about sort of like the consumption and the use. So.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, could you go ahead?
Your comment about the Rolling Stones actually helped crystallize something that's been bothering me and that I've been chewing on, because it made me flash on two different moments about the Stones. One was after listening to it all through my youth, coming back to the song Under My Thumb and realizing just what an awful message it has. So it kind of takes up the troublingness of some music. But the other one was learning this year about a concert in Prague that the Stones did in the 90s, that was this really important flashpoint for the freedom movement in Czechoslovakia. And to me, the reason why that's important to me is there's been a tendency in some of the conversation to kind of sort and label music as if its political meaning was kind of fixed inside the music. I mean, and I felt that when you were talking about early MTV and kind of remembering, U2's Sunday Bloody Sunday, whatever.
Great stuff.
So it seems to me I want to I want to emphasize the notion of how much the meanings of music travel and are labile and are kind of endlessly able to be reframed and reappropriated depending on the historic moment. They can't mean anything. I mean, Under My Thumb really is a troubling song, but it's the way in which music can cross across different political contexts,
left and right,
taken up in different ways. That's the most full of political possibilities.
Can I respond? I'm a kid who grew up with U2, loving songs like Sunday, Bloody Sunday, and a lot of what they did. But when I look at, let's say, Bono's role in Africa today, I understand clearly that the space they gave him to move into the consciousness of a whole generation, which MTV was a white supremacist institution. We have to admit that. For a good long time, it was very impossible to be a person of color and be on MTV. Now, I'm not going to rule out all the music that came on MTV. There was some really cool. I love The Cure. I love a lot of that stuff. It's amazing music to me. But I do have to look at how the voices of certain whole groups were marginalized by that particular move. Video, what was the big song that came on first? Video Killed the Radio Star. That was like the first song I remember from MTV, and it was telling you something. So, because the radio gave us the ability to listen without having to visually identify. And when I was signed to RCA Records, one of the things they asked me in the early 90s is, well, your music seems to move through all of these genres. Is it possible that we could put out your record without having to put your image on it? Because the market we're trying to get it to may not like seeing you do that. Now that is a direct result of what they had set up for years and years, because nobody had a problem with Bob Marley doing what he was doing.
Well, I'm sure they did.
I mean, well, in terms of the system then created a space where it became very difficult for those dreadlocks, which began moving all over the world.
But they were far more radical artists than Marley.
No, for sure. But at the same time, he still was able to do something. And there was more radical artists than Bob Marley. But when we go to Bob Marley, we go to him because he could write No Woman, No Cry and then turn around and write Get Up, Stand Up. Whereas a lot of the other artists that we dug didn't have that diversity of things. And I'm not praising him as a person, because he was a misogynist and a madman in a lot of ways too. But people's music, he knew, as far as music goes, I think there was a reason why we picked that man.
But I think, I mean, just to kind of return to, like, again, if I misread you, please correct me, Stats, but it's like the idea that there are institutional contexts that allow a Bob Marley to exist. And that that it's like when you have, when you have a mass movement happening throughout the Caribbean, throughout Jamaica, throughout the Caribbean, throughout the United States, throughout a bunch of different parts of the world, then there's this sort of opening. But, I mean, Bob Marley today, no.
Not in America.
Not in Jamaica.
No, not in Jamaica. Not in Jamaica. Maybe South Africa. No, there's places in the world where that can happen. It may not be what you think.
Yeah.
It can happen, just not here.
Who's
And not
wanting a
popular.
question? You start in the back?
Yeah, it's more of a comment.
Okay.
I really have appreciated the message of the power of one or the power of one-on-one, because there's a reason why bands like the one that you mentioned from Colombia kind of are able to expand into the more mainstream consciousness, and that's because we share that with somebody one-on-one. So I worked, for example, I worked at a radio station for 11 years, an independent radio station, and people would be like, I don't like independent music, and they would just make this like assumption about it that it wasn't good. But then I would like sneak on like a band that they never heard on, or put it on and be like, oh, what is that? I love it. And it'd have a message. And I think it's that ties into the politics, because it's about kind of like having that one-on-one with the person and sharing that message, whether it be through music or through that personal experience. And that's like what expands consciousness and gets people to kind of go there.
So ultimately, Chalk Town on an indie label.
Yeah.
Records,
Yeah.
Distributed. I didn't distribute my major, but I think it's all about indie, DIY. That's a political choice to what we choose to support. That's true.
Well, and
connected, we want to support our artists.
well, but it's also like we're in a particular historical moment, right? So that it's like, I mean, there are and I was being a little contrarian where I was asked when I was saying like, does Clear Channel matter? I mean, obviously it does. Obviously it does. But there's ways in which it doesn't. I mean, again, I have no idea. I mean, I will make a really embarrassing statement and say this as somebody who like writes about music and claims to care about music. I have no idea what the top 10 songs are right now. No idea, because I am no longer. That's no longer the channels through which I connect to music, and I should know those things, but I don't. Like, don't ever mention anything having to do with American Idol to me, because I don't have a TV, so I don't see it.
But I think you're...
And I'm not being dismissive of it. It's just not where I'm at, And I think it's easy, and it's a lot easier for a lot of people to be outside of these sort of like,
I agree that, again, and I'm, about being reductionist about what is political.
Right.
But it is true that it's more decentralized, that we all get our music different ways, we listen by ourselves, et cetera, et cetera. But I remember that I think it was last year in Britain when there was a new record came out through American Idol. It's all British, the British version of Idol.
British Idol.
Which is, Simon Cowell's thing. X
yeah.
Factor or whatever, and there was a campaign, like a viral campaign, in this very decentralized, lack of mass movement, blah, 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 where people went out and bought Rage Against the Machine, like some song by Rage Against the Machine, on the same day, and it outsold this Simon Cowell thing. Wow. Again, as how that happened is like in this very kind of, unorganized, it's organic, there are no leaders, there's nobody's waiting for a Mali or a whoever. It's an old song from I think the early 90s. That these moments can happen. The song works because people like it; they can dance to it. There's some subliminal messages in it, but at that point, people are like, "We're sick and tired of this kind of Cowell." We know that the British version of the Clear Channel is there, etc., etc. The iTunes have allowed us. Through iTunes, we can find our own music, and we can go buy. A lot of us can go buy this one particular song at this particular time, and we can flip the thing over.
Well, although it's like sometimes I think like we get really caught up in sort of like the political power of consumerism. So it's like, passing around the message to like, as a protest, we're going to buy this particular song. That's like a really easy and kind of painless thing to act on. And, and not to like go back to politics with a big P, but, what kind of campaign would you need to organize to get a bunch of people to show up somewhere where they would be in danger of being arrested? I don't know, Egypt. I don't know, and again, it's like Egypt didn't happen because of Twitter. Like there were all these movements already kind of in place,
And
you
there
know.
there was culture, there was music, there were local songs that had traction.
Right.
And we'll be making lots of videos, of those kind of local songs that we'll be playing.
I just heard that in Egypt, all those artists that people hadn't heard of for 20 years or so are now being heard. The ones that were off in corners making really powerful music, the ones that had stayed steadfast way back from the Sadat days. When it came to Tahrir Square, all those artists were brought forward, and sort of the gummy pop people who had supported Mubarak actually, they got dissed in a major way, pushed to the side, and nobody was trying to hear them. For people like me and people like him, that's important, because we're going to persist making a certain type of music, whether lots and lots of people hear it or not, and mainly because it feels really good for the soul. Other people will make other types of music, and that's cool, but when you've done this for a while and you really apply yourself to it in a very deep and emotional way, you find that this thing comes from something beyond you, and that there is a will for it to move towards beauty and peace and family and a positive energy. There is something like that in the universe. So I pray for those of you who want that good music, you'll go seek it and find it and make it comfortable for you. Make your environment comfortable for you through it.
I think that's a very beautiful note
Yeah.
on which to end it, and
Yeah,
thank
I
our
think
panelists for